The rain hit different that night. Cold enough to bite, hard enough to remember. I stood on the porch of the house I built with my own 2 hands. Every board, every nail, every hour of my life poured into that foundation, and I watched my son turn the deadbolt from the inside. He's really doing this. My own blood is really doing this. 67 years old, and I was standing in my socks in the Kentucky mud because Bradley Colby decided his father wasn't worth the roof over his head anymore. Behind me, the porch light flickered once and died. Like even the house didn't want to watch. If that image is sitting heavy on your chest right now, a father locked out of his own front door, stay with me because this story only gets deeper from here. Hit subscribe and drop a like so you don't lose your place, because what Bradley doesn't know yet is about to change everything. Now, let's go back to where it started. 3 months earlier, none of this seemed possible. My name is Everett Colby. I spent 41 years as a structural engineer, the last 20 of them consulting for bridge projects across 3 states. My wife, Loretta, passed 3 winters ago, cancer, quick and cruel, and since then this farmhouse outside Danville, Kentucky, had been quieter than a house that size has any right to be. Bradley moved back in 18 months ago, said it was temporary, said his equipment dealership just needed a season to catch up. I believed him, because that's what fathers do. I signed him onto the property deed for tax purposes. My accountant's idea, not mine, just to simplify things if anything happened to me. I never thought twice about it. Never thought I needed to. He's my son. You don't measure trust with your own boy. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't know for months, was that Bradley's dealership wasn't behind a season. It was behind 3 years, drowning in inventory loans he couldn't pay, personally guaranteed against everything he owned, including, as it turned out, things that weren't fully his to guarantee. His wife, Renee, never much cared for me. She was polite, in the way people are polite to something they're waiting to get rid of. I'd catch her watching me at dinner sometimes, studying me, the way I paused before finishing a sentence, the way I asked her to repeat things when the television was too loud. I chalked it up to her nerves about money. I had no idea she was building a file. The forgetfulness started as a whisper between them. I heard it once, through the wall, back in February. He left the stove on again. He didn't leave anything on, Renee. You turned it off yourself. I watched you do it. Doesn't matter what happened. What matters is what the doctor writes down. I told myself I misheard. I told myself a lot of things that winter. By March, they'd taken me to see a Dr. Whitlock in Lexington. Just a checkup, Dad, for insurance purposes. And I sat in that office answering questions about the president and the date and what year the war ended, feeling my face go hot with a shame I couldn't name. I passed every question. Renee didn't look happy about that. I remember thinking that was strange. I didn't understand yet what strange meant. Something's wrong here. Something's been wrong for a while, and I've been too tired, too grieving, too trusting to see it. April came in warm that year, unseasonably warm. The kind of early heat that makes the dogwoods bloom too soon. Bradley started bringing home paperwork for me to sign. Refinancing documents, he called them. Just restructuring the mortgage rate, Dad, saves us both money. I signed where he pointed. I didn't read every line. Why would I? He was my son. He was counting on exactly that. What I found out later, far later, when it no longer mattered to fix, only to answer for, was that half of what I signed that spring wasn't refinancing at all. It was a quitclaim, transferring my remaining interest in the house fully into his and Renee's names. The other half was a home equity loan against a property he now controlled outright. The funds rooted straight into propping up a dealership that was already circling the drain. I was 67 years old, and my own son had made me a ghost in my own home without me ever feeling the walls move. The dinner where it finally broke open was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were the nights I made Loretta's chicken and dumplings, the only recipe of hers I ever learned properly, and the kitchen still smelled like her when I cooked it. Bradley didn't touch his plate. Renee sat with her hands folded like she was at a funeral home instead of a dinner table. Dad, Bradley said, not looking at me, we've been talking, and we think it's time you considered somewhere more suited, somewhere with people who can help you. Help me? Help me with what, exactly? Say it. Say the word you're circling. I don't need help, son. I need you to look at me when you're lying to me. Renee's chair scraped back. This isn't easy for us either, Everett. We looked at Brookstone Manor. It's very nice. It's what's best. Best for who? Nobody answered that. Nobody had to. I already knew. I found out that night, standing in the rain with a single suitcase Bradley had packed for me, packed like I was a child going to camp, that Brookstone Manor placement papers had already been signed, not by me, by a power of attorney document I never remembered agreeing to, dated 6 weeks earlier, my signature on it looking close enough to mine that a stranger wouldn't blink, close enough that even I had to stare at it twice. That's not my signature. I know my own hand. I've signed my name 100,000 times in 41 years of blueprints and contracts. That is not my hand. But knowing it and proving it, standing soaked to the bone on my own front walk at 11 at night, were two very different things. The last thing I saw before Bradley shut the door was the flower bed along the east side of the porch. Loretta's roses, the ones I planted the spring after she died because I couldn't stand a yard without something alive that she'd loved. A landscaping crew had come through that same week. Renee's doing, I'd learn. Curb appeal, she called it. Already talking about a future sale. The roses were gone, torn out at the root, hauled off in a truck bed like they'd never mattered at all. Something in me went very still when I saw that bare patch of dirt. Not sadness. Something colder than sadness. They think I'm finished. They think this is the end of me. An old man too slow, too foggy, too broken to fight back. They have no idea what I actually have. They have no idea what I've spent 40 years quietly building 40 miles from here, in an account they've never once thought to ask about, because why would they? To them, I'm just their poor old father. They're about to learn how wrong they were. I stood in that rain a long time, long enough for my clothes to go from wet to heavy to something like a second skin, long enough to stop shaking from the cold and start shaking from something else entirely. Somewhere in downtown Lexington, in a filing cabinet nobody in my family had ever laid eyes on, there was a document that would mean absolutely nothing to Bradley or Renee if they read it tonight. Just numbers on a page. A name they didn't recognize. A Swiss trustee named Margit Aldenhoven, who'd managed my affairs quietly for 30 years, ever since a patent I sold in my 30s turned into something I never told a soul about. Not even Loretta. Not fully. Not the real number. $120 million. Sitting, untouched. Growing untouched. Waiting. I walked to my truck, the one thing, apparently, they hadn't thought worth stealing yet, and I sat behind the wheel with the rain drumming the roof like something counting down. You wanted to see a helpless old man disappear quietly into a nursing home, Bradley. Instead, you're about to find out exactly who you threw out into the rain. I turned the key. The engine caught on the second try, and for the first time in 3 months, I felt something other than grief. I felt ready. I didn't drive home that night. I didn't have one anymore. I drove to the Hampton Inn off Highway 127, checked in under my own name because I had nothing left to hide, and sat on the edge of a stiff hotel bed until 3 in the morning, staring at a water stain on the ceiling shaped like nothing at all. 41 years of building things that don't fall down. And I let my own family collapse right on top of me. I didn't cry that night. I want to say I did because maybe that would have felt human, but something in me had gone past crying into a kind of quiet I didn't recognize. Loretta used to say I got that quiet before big decisions, before we bought the farmhouse, before I turned down a partnership in Louisville to stay close to her mother in her last years. She called it my engineer's silence. The place where I stopped feeling and started calculating. I was calculating now. At 6 the next morning, before the sun had fully cleared the ridgeline, I called a number I hadn't dialed in almost 4 years. Margit Aldenhoven. Her voice hadn't changed. Precise, unhurried, a trace of Zurich still in the vowels after all these years managing money for men who mostly forgot she existed between crises. Everett, she said, like she'd been expecting the call. Maybe she had. Something has happened. Everything's happened. I told her all of it. The papers, the forged signature, the doctor's visit that felt like a trap dressed up as concern. the roses torn out of the ground. She listened without a single interruption, which was its own kind of mercy. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You built a wall around this money for 30 years, so no one could touch it," she finally said. "Including, I think, yourself. Are you certain you want to bring it down now?" "Am I certain? Margaret, my son had a woman's signature forged onto a document that put me in a nursing home. He tore out my wife's roses to raise the resale value on a house he doesn't legally own yet. I have never been more certain of anything in my life." "Then let's talk about how we do this correctly," she said. "Not loudly, correctly." That word, correctly, became the whole shape of the next 4 months. The first thing Margaret taught me, in a dozen careful calls over that spring, was that rage makes mistakes and patience makes plans. I wanted to walk into Bradley's dealership and burn it to the ground with words alone. She talked me down every time. "You don't confront a wound," she said. "You starve it." So, we starved it. I learned through a forensic accountant Margaret brought in named Wallace Prather, a soft-spoken man out of Louisville who'd spent 20 years untangling exactly this kind of family fraud, that Bradley's dealership was carrying nearly $2.4 million in inventory debt against a business worth a fraction of that on paper. He'd personally guaranteed loans through a regional bank, First Bluegrass Trust, using collateral that included, illegally, equity from a property he did not yet solely own. He used my house as a life raft, and when it wasn't enough, he decided to just take the whole house instead. Wallace built the case slow and airtight. Bank records, the refinancing documents with the forged power of attorney, a handwriting analyst out of Cincinnati who compared my genuine signature against the one on the file and called it, in a report thick enough to choke on, inconsistent with authentic execution, indicators consistent with forgery. I kept a copy of that report in my truck for 2 weeks. I'd sit in gas station parking lots and read it like scripture. By late May, Margaret made a suggestion that changed the entire shape of my revenge. "First Bluegrass Trust is a small regional bank," she said. "Undercapitalized, overexposed to commercial loans like your son's. A holding company could acquire a controlling position quietly, through channels your family would never think to trace back to you. My son doesn't know I have money. My son thinks I have a pension and a truck. Do it," I said. "Do it quiet." Through a shell entity Margaret's firm had used for decades, Aldenhoven Capital Partners, registered in Delaware, invisible to anyone without a reason to go looking, I became, over 6 discrete weeks, the controlling interest behind the very bank holding my son's business by its throat. Bradley Colby didn't know his father now owned the rope around his own neck. I need to stop right here, because this is the moment everything actually turned, and I want to know what you'd have done in his shoes. Would you have gone quiet like I did, playing the long game? Or would you have confronted them the second you found out? Drop a comment and tell me. And tell me where you're watching from tonight, because I want to know who's sitting with me through this one. There was one part of this I never planned for. One I couldn't have planned for, because I didn't even know she still thought about me. Her name is Katie, Bradley's daughter from his first marriage, 19 years old now, a sophomore at Eastern Kentucky University studying nursing. Renee had frozen her out of the family years ago. Too much of her late mother in her, Renee used to say, like that was a character flaw. Bradley, weak, the way he'd always been weak, let it happen rather than fight for her. I hadn't spoken to Katie in almost 2 years. Renee made sure of that, quietly, the way she made sure of most things. A canceled visit here, a forgotten phone call there, until the silence just calcified into distance and nobody could point to the exact moment it happened. She called me, in June, out of nowhere, her voice small on the other end of the line. "Grandpa, I heard what happened. I heard they put you out." She heard. She still thinks of me as someone worth calling. "I'm all right, Katie girl. I'm all right." "You're not all right. Dad's been weird all spring. Renee's been weirder. There's something going on with the dealership. I heard them fighting about the bank calling in a loan or something, and Dad sounded scared, Grandpa. Really scared." Good. I hated that thought the second it landed. Hated how easily it came. "Katie, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Do you trust me?" A pause. long enough that my chest went tight waiting on it. "You're the only one in that house who's never lied to me," she said. "So yeah, I trust you." I didn't tell her everything that night. I wasn't ready to put that weight on a 19-year-old's shoulders. But I told her enough, that her father and Renee had done something to me that couldn't go unanswered, that I needed her to just be honest with me about what she saw and heard in that house. Nothing more, nothing engineered, nothing rehearsed. I will not turn my granddaughter into a weapon. I've lost enough of my family this year. I won't lose her too by making her something she isn't. That promise to myself became the one rule I never let Margaret or Wallace or anyone else talk me out of. Katie stayed outside the machinery. She just stayed close and honest, and slowly, carefully, she started coming to visit me at the little rental house I'd taken outside Danville, close enough to town that I could watch the storm I was building from a safe distance. By July, the walls were closing in on Bradley from every direction, and he didn't even know I was the one closing them. First Bluegrass Trust, now quietly under Aldenhoven Capital's control, called an internal review of high-risk commercial accounts. Bradley's dealership sat at the top of that list. Wallace made sure of it, feeding the bank's new compliance officer, who had no idea whose interests she was actually serving, every red flag his forensic work had already uncovered. Second, the guardianship petition Renee had filed to formalize my incompetency hit a wall none of them saw coming. Instead of contesting it loudly, my lawyer, a sharp, quiet woman out of Lexington named Denise Okafor, requested, calmly and correctly, a full independent competency evaluation. Court ordered. Neutral doctor. No family influence. Let them watch me pass every single question again. Let them watch it happen in front of a judge this time. Third, and this was the piece that nearly broke my resolve to stay patient, I sent Bradley a letter. Handwritten. Calm, defeated sounding. I told him I understood. I told him Brookstone Manor was probably for the best. I told him I was tired of fighting and just wanted peace. Every word of it was a lie built to make him relax his grip. It worked. 2 weeks after that letter, Katie called me again, breathless. "Grandpa, they're listing the house. I saw the real estate sign guy in the driveway this morning. Renee said something about closing before the court date, before it's final. They're trying to sell my house out from under a case that hasn't even been decided yet." I sat with that information for a long moment, feeling something in my chest go cold and clear, the way it does right before I sign off on a structural drawing I know will hold. "Katie," I said, "how would you feel about coming to a courthouse with me next? Not to say anything you don't believe. Just to tell the truth, if anyone asks you for it." The line went quiet for a second. Then, steady, older sounding than 19, "I'd feel like it's about time somebody in that family did." That was the last piece I needed. August in Kentucky comes in heavy, the kind of heat that sits on your chest like a hand and doesn't lift until October. The competency hearing was scheduled for the 9th, a Tuesday, in a courthouse in Boyle County I'd paid property taxes near for 40 years, without ever once setting foot inside it. I didn't sleep the night before. I lay in that rental house listening to the window unit rattle and thought about every version of this day I'd imagined since April. The version where I screamed at Bradley across a table, the version where I simply disappeared and let him rot in the mess he'd made without me. Neither of those versions was sitting in my closet, pressed and waiting. The gray suit was, "Today, Bradley. Today you find out exactly who you threw out into the rain." I put it on slow, the way you put on something that matters. The same suit I'd worn to Loretta's funeral. I stood in front of the mirror longer than I needed to, straightening a tie that didn't need straightening, and for one unsteady second I saw my father in the reflection instead of myself. The same set jaw, the same tired eyes doing the work of staying calm. Denise Okafor met me on the courthouse steps at 8:15, calm as still water in a charcoal suit of her own, a leather folio under one arm thick enough to double as a doorstop. Wallace Prather arrived 2 minutes later, quieter than usual, nodding once like a man walking into a job he'd already finished in his head. And then Margaret Aldenhoven herself, flown in from Zurich 2 days prior, stepping out of a rental sedan in a navy coat despite the heat, moving through the parking lot like she owned the ground under it. "You look like a man who's about to win," she said. "I look like a man who's about to find out if winning feels like anything at all." She almost smiled at that. Almost. Inside, the courtroom smelled like old carpet and cold coffee. I sat at the petitioner's table with Denise while the gallery filled in slow behind us. Bradley came in at 8:52, 8 minutes early for once in his life, wearing a suit that fit him worse than it had a year ago. Renee walked half a step behind him, chin high, eyes doing that quick cataloging sweep of the room she always did, checking who was watching, deciding how to be seen. Bradley saw me first. I watched the color drain out of him like someone had pulled a plug at the base of his throat. He expected a broken old man shuffling in with a walker and a public defender who'd never met him before that morning. He did not expect this. Renee's mouth found its familiar shape, tight, composed, already annoyed at whatever inconvenience today was about to be. Judge Patricia Reyes took the bench at 9 sharp. A woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up into gray hair, and the flat, unimpressed patience of someone who'd presided over 100 versions of families tearing each other apart over money dressed up as concern. She opened by calling for the independent competency evaluation, the one thing in this entire proceeding neither side had been allowed to influence. Dr. Amos Fielding took the stand. 60-some years old, soft voice, precise the way career clinicians get precise. No theater in him, just findings. He read through cognitive testing scores, memory assessments, orientation questions, full function across every category, no indicators of dementia, no diminished capacity. Then he said the line I'd been waiting 4 months to hear out loud, in a room, on the record. "In my professional opinion, Mr. Colby is entirely capable of managing his own affairs, and I would go further to say the referenced medical history submitted in the original guardianship petition appears inconsistent, significantly inconsistent, with my direct clinical findings." Renee's hand found Bradley's forearm under the table. He didn't look at her. I watched something in his shoulders drop, like a man realizing the ground under him had been thinner than he thought for a long time. Then Denise stood, and the real hearing began. She laid it out in the order we'd rehearsed a dozen times, never rushed, never theatrical, just facts stacked one on top of the next like brick courses in a wall. The forged power of attorney first, blown up on a screen beside 41 years of my authentic signature pulled from blueprints, tax filings, engineering contracts, going back to 1987. Then the handwriting analyst's report, the one I'd read in gas station parking lots until the pages went soft. Inconsistent with authentic execution. Indicators consistent with forgery. Then the refinancing documents. Then the quitclaim deed, filed 6 weeks before I was ever told a single word about any insurance checkup. This is the part where you finally understand what 41 years of reading contracts taught me, son. You cannot out-document an engineer. Bradley's attorney, a young man named Corey Hutto, who looked like he'd graduated law school 18 months ago and drawn the short straw in this case, tried to object twice, both times reaching for procedural language that didn't quite land. Judge Reyes overruled him without looking up from the exhibit in her hands. The second time she added almost gently, "Counsel, I'd encourage you to save your objections for something that actually helps your client." A ripple of something moved through the gallery. Not quite a laugh, just relief finding somewhere to go. Then Wallace took the stand, and the financial picture opened up like a wound. Bradley's dealership debt, the personal guarantees, the loan default now sitting at First Bluegrass Trust. And then, this was the moment I'd built 4 months of silence around. The ownership structure now controlling that very bank. "Can you clarify for the court?" Denise asked, voice level as a plumb line. "Who currently holds the controlling interest in First Bluegrass Trust, the institution now moving to call in Bradley Colby's defaulted commercial loans?" Wallace didn't blink. "Aldenhoven Capital Partners, which is wholly owned by Everett Colby." The courtroom went so quiet I could hear the air conditioning cycle on in the ceiling. Bradley turned in his seat and looked at me. Really looked, for the first time since I'd walked in that morning, and what was on his face wasn't anger. It was something closer to vertigo. Like the floor under his entire understanding of his father had just been revealed as false, all at once, in front of a room full of strangers. You called me poor at my own dinner table, son. You told your wife I was a burden you could barely afford to house. You had no idea, did you?" Renee's composure finally cracked, just slightly, a single blink too many, her fingers going still on the table in front of her. Hutto, grasping now, made his last desperate move. He requested to call a witness of his own, Katie Colby. I promised her she'd never be a weapon in this. If this goes wrong, if he twists her up on that stand, my stomach dropped the way it had the night Bradley locked that door. I felt Denise's hand find my forearm under the table, steady, a silent let it happen, trust it. Katie walked up in a plain blue dress, hands folded in front of her, chin steady in a way that landed in my chest like a physical thing. The same set of her grandmother's jaw, the same refusal to shrink under a room full of eyes. Hutto asked her, careful and leading, whether her grandfather had coached her, told her what to say today, turned her against her own father. "No, sir," Katie said, clear enough to reach the back row. "He told me the opposite. He told me not to say a single thing I didn't believe was true. He made me promise that before I ever agreed to come." "And what do you believe is true?" She didn't look at the lawyer when she answered. She looked past him, straight at her father, and her voice didn't shake once. "I believe I watched my stepmother coach a doctor's visit before it ever happened. I believe I heard them talking about a nursing home weeks before Grandpa ever got a real diagnosis from anybody. And I believe my dad let it happen, not because he was scared for Grandpa's mind, but because he was scared of losing the dealership, and Grandpa's house was the easiest thing in reach." Bradley put his face in his hands. Renee stared straight ahead, jaw locked, already doing the math on her exit. The hearing ended 40 minutes later. Guardianship petition dismissed in full. Fraud referral forwarded to the district attorney's office. The forged power of attorney voided, struck from record. I had won everything I came for. So why doesn't it feel finished? That night Margaret met me at the little rental house with a folder I hadn't asked for, setting it on the kitchen table between 2 mugs of coffee neither of us drank. "There's a decision left," she said. "The dealership debt. First Bluegrass can call the full loan tomorrow morning if you instruct them to. Bradley loses the business. Likely the house on Persimmon Lane too, everything he's built since the divorce. Total collapse, inside of 90 days. I could end him. Completely. Tonight, with one phone call." I sat with that for a long moment, picturing it. Bradley standing in an empty lot, the same way I'd stood in the rain outside my own front door. There was a version of me, a fresher version, 4 months younger, that would have made that call without a second thought and slept better than I had in a year. "And if I don't call it in?" "Then you structure a settlement, reduced, survivable. It still costs him the business as he's built it. That part doesn't change either way, but it's slower, quieter, less satisfying maybe, to whatever's still burning in you." "What happens to Katie's college fund if the full collapse goes through?" I asked. "Bradley set something up years back, small, tied into the dealership's assets. She doesn't know I know about it." Margaret checked her notes, quiet for a moment. "It liquidates with everything else. She loses it along with him. There it is, the one variable I never calculated for. My revenge has a blast radius, and my granddaughter is standing directly inside it. I thought about Loretta's roses, torn out at the root. I thought about the rain on my back the night Bradley turned that deadbolt. I thought about 4 straight months of wanting, with a purity that scared me some nights, to watch my son lose everything the way he'd made me lose everything. Then I thought about Katie's steady voice on that witness stand, choosing the truth over a father who'd never once chosen her back. Restructure it, I said. Reduce settlement, not forgiveness. He loses the dealership regardless, that's not negotiable. He built it on ground he stole and it dies standing right there. But protect Katie's fund first, before a single other dollar moves. And the house on Persimmon Lane, that transfers into Katie's name outright when this settles. Not mine. Hers, free and clear. Margaret studied me for a second, something almost like respect crossing her face. That's not the ending I expected from you, Everett. It's not vengeance anymore if it eats the one person in this whole family who never once lied to me. The dealership closed at the end of October, the same week the maples along Persimmon Lane turned the color of rust. Bradley lost it entirely. Inventory seized. The lot sold at a discounted auction. His name quietly attached to a fraud referral that would follow him if he ever tried to open another lot in that industry again. Renee left before the ink dried on the settlement paperwork. Money gone, illusion gone. She had no more use for a man holding neither. I moved back into the farmhouse in November, the week the first frost silvered the fields on either side of the drive. Katie helped me carry boxes up the porch steps, not because I needed the help at 68 with 2 good arms, but because she wanted to be standing there when I walked back through that door for the first time since April. The house was legally hers now. I'd made her sign nothing, promise nothing in return. Just told her, plainly, that it was hers, free and clear, hers to keep or sell or fill with a family of her own someday, whatever she decided. She cried on the porch when I told her. I didn't. I already did my crying for this family. I did it standing in the rain back in April, and I don't have any left over. We replanted the roses that same weekend. Katie on her knees in the cold dirt beside me, both of us in Loretta's old gardening gloves, setting new bushes into the same bed where the originals had been torn out and hauled off like they never mattered. Halfway through, hands black with soil, she asked me if I thought I'd ever forgive her father. Forgiveness isn't the same thing as forgetting what he did, I told her, tamping soil around a root ball with the flat of my hand. I can want him to find his way back to being a decent man someday. That doesn't mean I owe him my front door again to prove it. Bradley calls sometimes now. Short calls. Careful ones. Like a man walking across ice he's not sure will hold him. I answer most of them. Not because the wound's healed, it isn't, and some part of me suspects it never fully will, but because Katie still loves her father, messy and complicated as that love is, and I refuse to be the reason that door stays bolted forever. Some doors you lock for your own protection. Others you just leave unlatched, in case somebody finally decides to come through them honestly, on their own 2 feet, asking for nothing but the chance to try. The roses bloomed again the following spring, right on schedule, like they'd never left the ground at all. If this story stayed with you, that bare patch of dirt where the roses used to be, Katie's steady voice on that witness stand, the moment Bradley finally understood exactly whose bank he'd been begging for mercy from, hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Drop a comment and tell me, what moment across all 3 parts hit you the hardest? And where in the world are you watching from? I read every single one. Thank you for being here. There is so much more coming, and you do not want to miss it.